Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV, where it is my absolute pleasure today to be joined by Charlie Jane Anders. Get this, the Hugo and Nebula award-winning author of All the Birds in the Sky and The City in the Middle of the Night. But we are here today to talk about Charlie Jane's new book, out on April the 13th from our colleagues at Titan Books and available for the pre-order at the links attached to this video, Victories Greater Than Death. Right there. And there's the Titan cover right there. How are you, Charlie Jane?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. I'm really well.
Yeah. Nice.
We just had a great off-camera chat about various things, including Ealing Studios in London, Armistead Maupin, and San Francisco. But now we get to talk about your book. So what can you tell me about Victories Greater Than Death, which I have to tell you is probably my favorite book title of the last 2 years?
Oh,
I think
nice.
it's an amazing. Good. I think you do. By the way, I think you do great book titles. I've loved the titles of all your books. You know, All the Birds in the Sky, City in the Middle of the Night. They're always very resonant. Is that?
Nice.
Do they come from you? Do you work with an editor, or you work on the titles with?
You know, usually the way things work with my titles, I'll tell you about Victories Greater Than Death in a second. But the way things usually work with my titles is, I have a working title, and then everybody's like, "No, you can't use that." And then I have like 5 other titles. I was like, no, you can't use those. And then finally, in frustration, I'm like, well, here's the thing. Like, actually, you know, in the case of All the Birds in the Sky, for a long time, it started out being called just like Mad Scientist versus Witch or whatever. And then it became less verses and more just about their relationship. And then for a long time, it was called Indestructible Friends, which is sort of like the thing that's said at the end of the book. And then for a while, I was calling it Our Shoes Will Be Insane, because there's a line in the book where Patricia says our shoes will be insane. And if I stuck with that title, the cover would have just been a pile of shoes, maybe, and it would have probably sold 3 copies.
Yeah.
But so then I All the Birds in the Sky was just like a thing that, it's a quote from the middle of the book. And that's often where, if I'm desperate, I just like go hunting through the book for like a phrase that I can lift. And just, I learned that from an editor a long time ago, an editor who, you know, was like, well, I don't really like, it was for a short story. They were like, I don't like this story title, but here's a phrase in the story that you could just use as the title. And I'm like, okay, done, great. So I've learned the hard way that you could just do that. Victories Greater Than Death, I feel like that's a phrase from the book too, actually. She kind of, part of why I liked it is because it's a thing that keeps coming back in the book. So it feels like it kind of adds a little bit of relevance and resonance and stuff to have that in there. So yeah, okay, Victories Greater Than Death is my young adult debut. It is, you know, the story of a teenage girl named Tina, who has known for a few years now that she's not actually a human, even though she lives on Earth and she looks like a human. She's actually the clone of an alien hero who died before she was born. And, you know, the alien hero was cloned. When you clone someone, it's a baby, obviously. The baby was sort of doctored to look human, to be genetically human if you didn't know what you were looking for. And the baby has all the memories of this alien hero, but they're suppressed because when you're a baby, you can't handle all the memories of an adult. So when Tina is old enough, she'll get to go into space and go be an incredible space hero and save the galaxy and fight for justice. And just generally kind of get to be awesome. And she's just waiting and waiting for that time to arrive. She just wants to leave this planet, leave, you know, the human species behind and go off and like be an awesome space hero, because who wouldn't? I mean, that's all I wanted when I was a teenager. Like, honestly, when I was pretty much from like grade school through like, you know, secondary school, I was just always like, get me off this planet, just come and get me. Like sometimes it was like, I wish a starship would swoop down and come and get me. Sometimes it was like, I wish the TARDIS would just appear and just like be like, and the doctor would step out and be like, you know, come with me or whatever. You know, I definitely had a lot of daydreaming about like aliens showing up and saying, you don't belong on this planet, you're not really a human, we're your real people, come with us, you know. And I would just be like, fine, I'm out of here, great, let's do it. I just, no hesitation whatsoever. I would have just dropped everything. I would have been like, can I bring like a few James Brown records with me? And okay, I'm good. Like if I can bring these 3 James Brown records with me into space, I'm totally on it. let's do it. And so, but once she gets into space, once she gets to sort of confront her destiny, it doesn't turn out the way she's expecting, because these things never really do. And, she's not, she can't just step into this role that she's been waiting to embrace. And, things get more complicated and a little bit more dangerous. And she starts to sort of realize that there's, kind of a downside to this thing of like being a hero, and that, she can't really do it on her own. She needs her friends, and she needs to kind of, you know, she can't just like make heroic speeches and blow things up. She needs to do other things in order to survive and succeed and win. And so it's really about like searching for your identity, which is the
Yeah,
thing that's always a theme in my
good.
books,
Yeah.
trying to figure out who you really are, and trying to kind of like reaching for this ideal version of yourself, but also just trying to figure out who you really are, like your real self inside.
And Charlie Jane, is it a contained story? So basically, are you going to be able to further explore this universe, or are you one and done with it?
No, this is the first book of a trilogy.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Brilliant.
Book 2 of the trilogy is basically done. I am currently kicking the tires, lighting a few small things on fire, and kind of like, I'm kind of just doing the revisions on the second book. The third book I've started writing, and I have a very good outline. And, it's a self-contained trilogy. Honestly, I put so much time and energy into creating this universe and coming up with like a dozen different alien species, and like a complicated history of the galaxy, and like all this technology and stuff, that I would really love to keep coming back to it. Like, I think that, if the trilogy does well enough and people are like, yeah, we want more, I probably wouldn't write more about these characters, but I would write more about this universe. I would come back and be like, here's another story set in the same universe. And there's definitely stories that I want to tell that I haven't gotten to tell yet.
I mean, that makes total sense to me, because I think I've often spoken with authors who have a sense of frustration that they invest all this imaginative time in building a world, and then you exit at the end of one novel and move on to building another world. It's like, man, that's some really good stuff there, And what you're doing, of course, is analogous to 80 years of comic book history. You create the world. Actually, those guys didn't intentionally create those worlds. It was a byproduct of what they were doing, but they did. And then you can just go back and, explore it, whether it's the Marvel universe, the Star Trek universe, the Doctor Who universe, whatever. There are a lot of avenues you can go into. So let me ask you about how easily did the world building aspect of creating Victories Greater Than Death come to you? Is it something that you relished and enjoyed? Was it tough to do? What was your experience of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a little bit of both with the world building. There's always like the parts where you're like, oh, this is fun. Oh, I like this part. Oh, this is really cool. And like, well, I get to come up with all this stuff. It's like, it's playing in a sandbox and getting to just like have all your toys and getting to like build awesome stuff. There's also times when you're sort of banging your head against the wall and you're like, oh God, I need to come up with a thing for this, and I have no freaking clue, and I don't know what I'm doing, and like, what the heck is this thing? And I need a thing here, and I can't just manifest it. I mean, with Victories Greater Than Death, obviously, I'm trying to do a space opera. It's very much like in the vein of Star Trek, but also Star Wars, Guardians of the Galaxy,
Yeah.
a little bit of Battlestar Galactica, a little bit
Yeah.
of like, The Expanse, and, just all of the space operas I grew up reading, all of the, everything. And so when you're doing something like that, you have a responsibility to kind of be true to the spirit of the genre, and to include all the stuff that you want to see, and that makes the genre awesome. Like in my view, like I was very consciously thought about that, and I made just like, okay, I want to have space battles. I want to have like a big, mysterious, scary alien object that people have to figure out what it is, like all that kind of juicy stuff. But you also don't want to just do kind of a cover version of the stuff that you've seen before. You don't want to just be like, well, it's Star Trek, but instead of transporters, they've got
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
farters or whatever.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
It's just you don't want to just like do a cover version, and you want it to have its own internal logic. And so you really want to think about like, what haven't I seen before? And obviously, you know, in the back of your mind that even if I haven't seen something before, there's going to be somebody who's going to come up to me and be like, well, you know, this author did this in 1973, and you totally like that's always going to happen. But what haven't I seen before? What, you know, what just feels fresh and interesting and new to me? And so, taking the example of the transporters, I decided pretty early on that I didn't want my starship in this book to have transporters. I didn't want to be able to teleport off a planet and onto the ship like they do on Star Trek, or here's a good British reference, Blake Seven. You know, I
Great
love,
reference.
you know, what I love about Blake Seven, incidentally, is on Star Trek when they transport down to a planet, they arrive and they're just standing with extreme dignity, and they're just like, you know, they're like ready to go. Whereas on Blake Seven, I feel like it's more realistic. When they teleport down and this little outline appears around them, they always kind of go, whoa. Like they
Yeah,
always kind of
that's
like
so true.
they always kind of fall over a little bit because they've just landed on a
Yeah,
planet and there's like
yeah,
different
right.
gravity, and like
Yeah.
they maybe the ground's a little uneven under their feet. Maybe they're just like they're not sure what they're gonna find down there. So they're just like, you know,
Yeah, yeah, and
it's
I think it's also in keeping with the sort of ramshackle beauty of Blake Seven.
oh my God.
You know what I mean? It's highfalutin space opera on a certain budget,
Yeah, I
and you know,
love that show.
yeah, it's an amazing show. It's a great
That
show.
show has a really special. I saw it when I was a very young and impressionable
Yeah,
age, and I was sort of like, you know, I was already a Doctor Who fan. And I was like, whoa, this is like if Doctor Who got very dark and twisted, and you know. Anyway, so there's no. So I was like, my starship will not have a, you know, a teleportation thing, because I feel like that makes it way too easy in a lot of situations. If you're like, okay, the planet's about to explode, we'll just like beam up, okay, we're fine now, you know. And it's just sort of like, no. And like it just it felt, and it also just feels like, you know, it feels like a little greedy. If you can already travel faster than light and you can already do all this other stuff, being able to just teleport yourself is just, it's like a freaking cherry on top of the sundae of
yeah,
like wish
of
fulfillment.
course it is.
So you know, so instead I was like, okay, I don't want to give them shuttles or like, you know, little ships that go up and down, because that's, I feel like I've seen that too much. What if they have like a kind of space elevator that I'm going to never really explain how it works other than like some hand wavy jargon, that takes, like, it's a little platform. It's almost like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory now that I think about it.
Yeah, like the Great Glass
Charlie and the Great
Elevator or
Glass
something like that.
Elevator, I
Yeah,
guess, is the sequel.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's a little bit like that. It's like a big round piece of metal. It's a pizza dish basically. You step on and it gets you up to the ship in a couple hours, which is, I did some research and some back of the envelope sums, and that's, you know, unrealistically fast. Like a rocket or any kind of like, you know, to escape from like the Earth's gravitational well in and reach a ship in orbit in 2 hours is just, that's not even
It's not even
plausible.
a thing.
But
Yeah,
you know, but you know, it's more plausible than teleportation, I think,
of course, of
possibly.
course.
And and I just like this thing of like, you know, to get down to the planet, you have to spend a couple hours sitting on this thing. It ended up being fun because you get to have like moments of people sitting on the little kind of elevator platform, kind of having a conversation when they're about to go down to a planet and face a life or death situation. It also just like adds to the danger of like, we have to get up to the ship. It's going to take us 2 hours to get up to the ship. Meanwhile, all this stuff is happening, and we're just trapped on this platform for that the next 2 hours. And you know, and so it was actually, it added a little bit more danger. It felt more distinctive, and you know, and it felt more fun, you know, in a way than just having the easy teleportation system.
That this conversation is for me unlocking one of the keys to why your work is so much fun, because clearly just that one element of this world you've created, you've gone into such an intellectual rigor about
Aw.
how it actually works. But that's not the intellectual rigor of you know, kind of a a kind of senior biophysicist stroking their chin and trying to put a bunch of stuff together. That it was tremendously entertaining at the same time, very emotionally engaging, you know, in a way that deep level hardcore science isn't. So I think the fact that you've thought it through, but it's constantly entertaining. I mean, that is the most entertaining conversation I've ever had about a
Oh,
transporter analog within a science fiction novel. So you know, I think that's the key to what makes your work so enjoyable.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
And,
Yeah.
and
So yeah.
Charlie Jane, could I just ask you, because we're rocketing towards the end of our interview, but I wanted to ask, do you have a title for book 2 yet?
I do. I don't think it's set in stone, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say because I've learned the hard way that publishers like to have reveals, and like if you say something and they're not ready to reveal it,
Oh
they get
yeah, they
very
get
bent
very
out of shape.
testy. I'm a
Yeah.
publisher. I'm a publisher myself, and I know how that feels. So I just thought maybe it had happened, and we could talk about it. And the other thing is, what single thing, if you can whittle it down like this, in this novel, are you most proud of?
Oh wow. Oh gosh. I actually do have an answer to that.
Brilliant.
Because, and this is a bit of a spoiler, but it's not a major spoiler. So basically, there's a scene like about halfway through where Tina, the main character, has to kill some people for the first time. She's in a life or death situation. Her friends are going to die. She's going to die. The only option, the only way out is to kill some folks. And she actually has good combat skills for reasons that are too complicated to go into. And so she hesitates for a moment, but then she steps up and does it. And the emotional fallout of that, the emotional fallout of taking a life, taking 3 lives actually, is huge, and it's just overwhelming. And it's something that honestly, that scene, that whole chapter where she kills and then has like kind of an emotional, you know, breakdown over it,
Yeah.
that that scene was not in my outline. It was not something that I had planned on.
Interesting.
I was just like, okay, this part of the book was just gonna be, they have a few little adventures before they go to fight the big bad, kind of. And I didn't even think of that as like as like a thing. And then when I wrote it, I was like, no, she has to like feel this. It has to be a thing. And 2 things about that. One is that scene ended up changing the whole rest of the book because once I had that and I was really just confronting that thing of like, the hugeness of taking the life of a person, like a person who was alive a minute ago and now they're not, and you did this. Like, I feel like that was something that ended up being like really central to Tina's journey in
Yeah.
a way, because she has to really think about like whether she wants to just go around killing people, which I feel like a lot of action movies, a lot of like adventure stories just kind of gloss over that. They're just like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, killing, whatever, we killed somebody, it's fine. And I really wanted to kind of sit with that and kind of think about that, and it ended up changing how Tina's story kind of turns out in the end a little bit. And the other thing is, after I made that decision and kind of wrote that chapter and kind of thought about it, I was at a panel. I was in the audience at a panel at the Nebula Awards, where it was a panel of actual teenagers talking about young adult fiction. Like everybody on the panel was a teenager, which I thought was brilliant, and I wish that happened more often. And it was just, I learned so much from listening to these teens talk about what they love and what they don't love in YA. And one of the things that they kept saying was, when there's violence, especially when there's killing, I really want to see a realistic or like a thoughtful, take on like what this means and what this costs. And I don't want it to just be like glossed over in YA anymore. And and I thought, and so I had already kind of started moving in that direction, and it really made me feel like, okay, I feel like this is a sign from the universe that I'm doing the right thing here. And the more I thought about it, the more I talked to people, I was like, kids, especially in the United States, you're in the UK, you don't have this. In the United States, kids, when it's not during a pandemic, are constantly having to be worried that someone's going to come in
Oh
and start
yeah.
shooting
Yeah.
everybody in
Of
their
course.
school. The idea that just shooting somebody is like, it's, you have to really confront that, I think. You
Yeah.
have to really think about that. And so that ended up being a thing that I'm very proud of in the book. And I'm also just proud of the sheer number of LGBTQ characters that I
Yeah.
included and the amount of queer representation in this book.
Oh,
Because yeah.
absolutely. I mean, that's, I think, something that's amazing. Sorry, I don't mean to talk over them. I
No,
was
no,
just,
no, no,
I was
no.
so embracing what you were saying. I completely agree. Something that strikes me about what you just mentioned about the construct you just talked about the effect that taking a life actually has, and the effect that would have on anybody in real life, and the fact that it was not something you planned. The analogy that was whizzing through my mind, which funnily enough actually involves a moment of cartoonish comic book taking a life without any consequence, is that that was your Raiders of the Lost Ark moment. Whereas the key transformative moment in Raiders of the Lost Ark that gets the audience on board is when Indy kills the swordsman. There's the whole thing as the swordsman comes up, and it's a big gag and it's very funny. But if that's the first time you're watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, traditionally that's the moment when the audience is grabbed. Then you've got them. But that scene was only filmed because Harrison Ford was too tired to do the fight, and he's like, "Look, why don't I just shoot him?" Yeah, and it wasn't planned. He just made it up on the day. And it's exactly what you're just talking about with Victories Greater Than Death. But of course, the example of Raiders of the Lost Ark is absolutely somebody just callously taking your life in a cinema fashion where you don't even think about what's happened to that swordsman who's just had his head blown off or whatever. So I find that dissonance very interesting.
Maybe the sword guy in Raiders of the Lost Ark, maybe he was just injured and he got really good medical attention. Maybe he got shot in the shoulder and he fell over.
The bullet went straight through. Yeah.
And then he got really good medical attention, and they and he had really good insurance or whatever. I don't know if he needs insurance where in that country, but they had a really good healthcare system, and he was up on his feet in a matter of weeks. That's what I hope for that guy.
And retrained as a blacksmith or something. Gave up deadly weapons forever. Yeah,
sure.
From now on, that's exactly what I'm going to think when I watch that scene. I think that's a very hopeful way of looking at it. On that note of hope, this has been Forbidden Planet TV. It's been my absolute privilege to be talking to this supremely talented Charlie Jane Anders, Hugo and Nebula award-winning author, about the epic Victories Greater Than Death, which you can pre-order from the links attached to this interview. Charlie Jane, it's been great hanging out with you.
Lovely hanging out with you too. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. Have a lovely evening.
And thanks for carving out the time for us, and come back and see us about the next novel in this series, please.
Will do.
Okay.
Will do.
Take care. All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.